We are coming on the air with major Supreme Court decisions to fill you in on. I'm Kate Cagle, and this Friday edition of your afternoon, it starts right now. We begin with a Supreme Court ruling on the judicial power known as a universal or nationwide injunction. These are orders from lower court judges that prevent laws or policies from being enforced across the country. And today, a split decision in the Supreme Court said those lower courts lack the authority to grant this kind of restriction. And this is all coming because of President Trump signed an executive order repealing birthright citizenship. So after a lawsuit was filed, a federal judge blocked that order using one of these injunctions. Today, the Supreme Court's conservative majority took issue with the injunction used in this case. The High Court says these injunctions should only apply to the specific parties involved and only enforced within a judge's jurisdiction. Some exemptions are made for class action lawsuits. SCOTUS sent the case back to the lower courts, ordering the judge to tailor its order to comply with those guidelines. Now, as for the birthright case, 22 states are involved in this lawsuit. It is unclear if the lower court's injunction will be applied only to those states. It's also unclear if the birthright citizenship repeal will be permitted in the other 28 states. So this is a developing situation we are tracking. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote in the dissent, saying in part, quote, "The court's decision is nothing less than an open invitation for the government to bypass the Constitution." Here is what President Trump's had to say this morning about today's ruling.
This is really also a decision based on common sense. It didn't work the other way. It was a disaster where somebody from a certain location in a very liberal state or a liberal judge or a liberal group of judges could tie up a whole country for years because their decision would sometimes take years to overturn. We've overturned many of the decisions, but it would take years to do it. And we have to act quickly when it comes to illegal immigration.
No longer. Today,
Attorney General Pam Bondi says she expects the entirety of the matter on birthright citizenship and whether it can be repealed to be resolved during the court's next term in October. Here to help us understand what this really means, we are joined now by clinical professor of law at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson. Thank you so much for your time today, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
So what is your reaction to today's ruling on universal injunctions?
So I think this went fairly in a predictable sense after we listened to oral arguments. As you said, this case came to the court based on a challenge to President Trump's executive order about birthright citizenship. But in fact, it has nothing to do with the constitutionality of that executive order about birthright citizenship. And I think there's a very strong chance that the Supreme Court would find that that order is not constitutional. This is all about the scope of relief that federal judges can provide, meaning when you walk into federal court and you say, there's a problem with this executive order, how broad can the relief that that judge provides be? Can the judge say, you're right, and so it will not go into effect just with respect to the people before me, the parties before me, or you're right, and this executive order can't go into effect anywhere in the country. Today, the court said that those nationwide injunctions are generally improper. And so if people want broader relief than just the individual plaintiffs who are walking into court, they need to use a different vehicle, something like a class action suit. And we can talk about what happens next, but my suspicion is that we will see a class action suit when it comes to this executive order about birthright citizenship.
Well, I want to play you this clip from Attorney General Pam Bondi today, saying that these injunctions meant that a few judges were dictating national policy and essentially undermining the administration's ability to roll out their agenda. Take a listen to what she said.
to put this in perspective, there are 94 federal judicial districts. 5 of those districts throughout this country held 35 of the nationwide injunctions. Think about that, 94 districts, and 35 out of the 40 opinions with nationwide injunctions came from 5 liberal districts in this country.
Is that a fair assessment of what has been happening? And she also said that this is a relatively new phenomenon when you put it in the context of the nation's history.
So I think what she's talking about is really judge shopping. And this is something, to be clear, that both Democrats and Republicans and liberals and conservatives will do, because it's a strategic decision to go to a judge, if you can, who you think will provide a favorable decision. And so this is part of the argument against nationwide injunctions, that you shouldn't be able to go to a single federal judge and say, this particular executive order can't be applied anywhere in the country. And again, we should be clear that this is an argument that people on both sides of the ideological spectrum generally make. In terms of executive orders being challenged and whether or not there's more nationwide injunctions than there used to be, I think the answer is absolutely. There are also more executive orders than there used to be. So just like when we talk about, for instance, congressional statutes, are more statutes being struck down by the court? Even if the answer is yes, we then have to look to see, are there just simply many more statutes than there used to be?
Of course, people may remember that President Obama was criticized for his use of executive orders. Now, the Trump administration said today that they expect this matter of birthright citizenship to be resolved by SCOTUS in October. For his part, California Attorney General Rob Bonta says he will continue to challenge the order. Here's what he said today.
I'm hopeful that the court will see that a patchwork of state injunctions where birthright citizenship stands for some states but not others would inevitably create administrative chaos, sparking widespread confusion and spurring questions we don't have the answers to. The rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, they belong to everyone in this country, not just those whose state attorneys general have the courage to stand up to this president's anti-democratic agenda.
Jessica, it does seem like it would be a bit of a mess if babies born in some states got their citizenship, in other states didn't. How is this going to play out now?
So if we could go back to Attorney General Pam Bondi for a moment, I would just remind everybody that the question of the constitutionality of birthright citizenship is not currently pending before the court. They haven't accepted that case because nobody has appealed it to them. And I'm frankly kind of dubious that it ever will be appealed to the court. Now, with respect to the patchwork, I just want to lay out a few more specifics for everybody. So the birthright citizenship executive order will not go into effect for 30 days. So what's going to happen in that 30 days? I think what will happen is that plaintiffs will start trying to bring, as we talked about, these class action suits to get broader relief than just forcing people to sue kind of person by person or group by group. And I think there is a chance that this executive order really ends up not going into effect. Of course, I want to be careful and not say it absolutely won't. We have to see what happens in the next 30 days. But I think this is happening as we're having this conversation, is that people are starting to file these broader claims. And it is worth noting that when we're talking about President Trump's executive order about birthright citizenship, it wasn't just one federal judge. I believe we're talking about 3 consolidated cases here where all of the judges said, we agree with the challengers and we're implementing these nationwide injunctions. So I haven't at this moment seen the Trump administration be successful in trying to argue in favor of this executive order.
All right. Well, as you point out, this was very much a ruling about process. So thank you very much for taking us all to law school to understand it. Clinical professor of law at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We've got a lot more news to get to right after the break. Stay with us.